Number 1. In the late 70s, my uncle was studying medicine at the University of Chicago. After morning class, he decided he would hitchhike back home to Lincoln Park on the north side instead of paying for a taxi. A man drove up in a Plymouth Satellite and offered my uncle a ride. The man looked normal and seemed friendly, light-hearted even. So, my uncle got in the car and they started driving toward Lakeshore Drive. However, once they got there, the man drove south on Lakeshore instead of north toward Lincoln Park. My uncle told the man he was going the wrong way and to turn around and head north. The man looked at my uncle, put his hand on his knee and said, "No, son, you are coming with me," and smiled darkly at him. My uncle froze in panic, and when they hit traffic near the South Shore, he quickly unlocked the passenger door and ran away without looking back. A year or two later, on a cold December day, my uncle was having coffee in a cafe with my future aunt when he caught something on the TV that made his blood run cold. He saw the man that had picked him up from school that day the year before. He had been arrested for suspected rape and killing of over 20 young men and boys. The man on the television was John Wayne Gacy, and he had removed the door handle of the passenger side door to prevent the men he picked up from escaping. Number 2. My family and I used to go camping a lot when I was younger. Camping consisted of renting a cabin in the woods and spending a little time in the wilderness. So we consistently rented this cabin in Pennsylvania, where we would spend long weekends when everyone in the family had some time off. My 2 brothers and I, each being in the 9 to 12-year-old range, would always run off into the woods and bullshit around while my parents did whatever they did. The cabin was on a mountain. If you followed a dirt road a ways past the cabin, the forest would open up, and there was a large field on the top. The field was about the size of a football field. Near the edge of the field on the far side was a graveyard. The graveyard was pretty small. It contained about 20 graves, and they were surrounded by a wrought iron fence. The fence was about 10 to 12 feet tall, with Gothic-type spikes on the top. The fence had a gate, but it was locked with a thick, rusty chain and padlock. Being kids, we were able to spread the gates apart enough to squeeze through. The small gravestones were very old and worn. I remember seeing one dated in the 1890s. On top of one of the graves, just resting on it, was a smooth black stone. It looked onyx, a little smaller than a golf ball, but not perfectly round. my older brother picked it up and put it in his pocket. We dicked around a little, and then we left. Back at the cabin, which had one bedroom where my parents stayed, and a large living room/kitchen area where we stayed, we were hanging out while my parents were asleep. It was about 11:30 at night when a loud happened at the front door, which is right in the living room. Me and my brothers were scared shitless, understandably too afraid to answer the door. Again, the door shook moments later. It sounded like someone was trying to knock it off the hinges. My father emerged from the bedroom, asking what the fuck was going on. The door clashed. He knew by the looks on our faces we had no idea. He grabbed a wood chopping axe and walked over to the door. He looked scared shitless himself. He swung the door open, and there was nothing but the night. No one in sight. After hounding us for information, and us having no idea, we went back to bed. I think no one slept much, if at all, that night. The next day, we were back to dicking around in the woods, and we again found ourselves in the old graveyard. The smooth black stone that my brother had taken was on top of the same grave. We ran fast. Number 3. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert of East LA. The shortcut was all 2-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and a lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hot spot for satanic group activity. I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign, just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see something in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes. A suitcase, open with clothes scattered everywhere. 2 bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was the horror movie move. I scanned the road and saw a line I could drive past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right of the woman behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear and punched it and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple of 100 feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and the bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow I do not think it would have been good. Number 4. I was in Taiwan one year when I was younger and had traveled to a busy night market. These are popular gatherings that usually operate in the evening. Nearby, I spotted a sign for a net cafe in a 5-story tall building. Thinking I'd fire off some quick emails, I walked in the dark, small entrance of the building. The building was older and hadn't been well maintained, but that's not out of the ordinary in Taiwan. The entrance just had a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the elevator call button and entered. The elevator was uncharacteristically new compared to the building, but I didn't think much of it. Like some Chinese buildings, there wasn't a 4th floor, as it's considered bad luck, since 4 sounds like death. So it just read 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, which was usual. I looked for the floor for the net cafe. It was on the 6th floor. I pressed the button. It lurched into action quietly and began to ascend. When it stopped, I figured it was on my floor, so I instinctively began to step out. Right before stepping out, the sight outside the elevator stopped me. It was pitch dark, only lit by the light in the elevator. It looked like it hadn't been occupied for decades, with some random pieces of furniture covered with white cloths. It was a small building, so each floor was a single occupancy, meaning you can see the entire floor from the elevator. Thinking I must have gotten the wrong floor, I checked the light that indicates which floor you're on. Strangely, there was nothing. None of the indicators were on, but the floor button to the net cafe was still lit, so I knew I hadn't gotten there yet. That's when I noticed a figure moving in the distance. It was not very visible, but I could make out what looked like a person dressed in some kind of gown, moving slowly toward the elevator. I was terrified, so I started pressing the closed door button. As soon as I pressed it, the elevator light flickered off. It freaks me out to think about it right now. The lights flickered back on under a second and the door closed. The elevator jolted back to life, and a few moments later, it opened to the net cafe. I am beyond relieved at this point. I walked out and immediately sat down at a computer. After gathering my wits a bit, I walked over to the cashier's desk and told them what I saw. A girl working there listened, and her face turned ashen, so I asked her if she had heard of anything similar happening to anyone else. She told me that she had never experienced it, but some co-workers and occasional customers have brought it up. Basically, the building has 6 floors, and the 4th floor has a history. Apparently, the 4th floor used to be a hair salon until one of the employees killed herself. She slit her wrists over the hair wash station and died. The store continued operations despite stories of weird appearances. For example, when customers got their hair rinsed, the water would look a little red, as if the customer was bleeding. Lots of little things. Some people reported seeing someone's figure walking away in the mirror. Naturally, the business closed down a few months later. The building owner tried to rent the place out, but never had any luck. Most businesses are quite superstitious, and no one wanted to rent the 4th floor, especially after someone had died in it, even at a very cheap price. Finally, after dropping the price to nearly nothing, a stationery supply store wanted to rent it. During renovations, however, several accidents happened. Tools would end up in strange places. A mirror from the previous business shattered when no one was near it. And finally, a worker had his hand jammed between the elevator doors when it closed on him unexpectedly. The workers refused to continue working, and finally the business left, and the building owner finally gave up and shut the floor down. He then had the elevator company come in to replace the panel so that the elevator would never go to the 4th floor. That's right, the elevator was programmed to never go to the 4th floor. It doesn't even have a button. But for some reason, sometimes when people take the elevator, it would go to the 4th floor, and the doors would open. And some, like myself, would see a figure walking around in the dark. Number 5. When I was young, my grandmother came over to our house to babysit me one night, as she had many times before. Nothing unusual happened the entire night. When my mother came home, she decided to check the answering machine to see if there was anything on it. There was one message, and it was a few minutes long. The message was just my grandmother and I, and on it, we were laughing hysterically the entire time. The night had been completely normal, and there was not a moment when the phone rang, or any moment when we laughed hysterically for minutes on end.